The house didn't just stand on the hill, it exhaled. It was a Victorian relic in a state of perpetual perspiration. Every wall felt like damp skin, and the air carried the cloying, sweet scent of rotting peaches and wet wool. My parents called it character. I called it a predator. I grew up in the sunroom, a naming irony that never escaped me, as the windows were so caked with a grayish, translucent film that the light entered only as a bruised purple haze. My bed was an old mahogany frame that creaked in rhythms that felt like a slow, stuttering heartbeat. When I was 6, I found the first friend. He lived in the vent, a dark, rectangular throat in the corner of the ceiling. I called him the Whistler. He didn't have a face, or at least not one I could see through the iron slats. He was a collection of pale, elongated fingers that would occasionally twitch in the dark. He never spoke. He only produced a high-pitched, harmonic hum that vibrated in my teeth. "It's just the wind in the old pipes, Elias," my mother would say, her eyes darting to the corner of the room. She was always wiping the walls with bleach, her hands raw and red. She never looked at the vents. Never. The terror wasn't a scream, it was a slow erosion. By age 10, I realized the house was changing me. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked stretched. My neck seemed a fraction too long, my skin a shade too gray. I started to see the static, tiny shimmering particles in the air that danced like insects. I wasn't the only one seeing things. My father, a man once built of granite and silence, began to carry a hammer everywhere. He wasn't fixing anything, he was tapping. Tap, tap, tap on the floorboards, tap, tap, tap on the drywall. "The hollows are growing, Elias," he whispered one night, his eyes bloodshot and wide. "Can't you hear the space between the bricks? It's breathing, it's hungry." One evening, I woke up to find the bedroom door wide open. The hallway was a tunnel of thick, gelatinous shadow. At the far end stood a figure. It looked like my mother, but she was leaning at an impossible angle, her spine curved like a question mark. She wasn't walking, she was sliding. As she passed my door, she didn't turn her head. She didn't have to. A second face was stitched into the side of her neck, a weeping eyeless thing that mouthed the word, "Run!" I didn't run. I stayed for 22 years. The house became a claustrophobic ritual. We ate in silence as the wallpaper bubbled and wept black bile. We slept with the lights on, but the bulbs grew dimmer every week, as if the darkness were a physical weight crushing the filaments. My mother was the first to soften, that's the only word for it. She didn't die, she just became part of the architecture. One morning, her bed was empty, save for a damp gray residue that smelled of the basement. Her voice, however, remained. I could hear her muffled humming coming from behind the bathroom tiles. My father didn't mourn, he just kept tapping, tap, 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 until one day the hammer went through the wall and something pale and wet pulled him into the breach. I didn't see what it was. I only saw his boots dragging across the floor before they vanished into the darkness behind the lath and plaster. I left the next day. I didn't pack. I just walked out the front door, the sunlight hitting my face like a physical blow. For a decade, I lived in a sterile white apartment in the city. I scrubbed everything. I obsessed over air purifiers. I married Sarah, a woman who smelled of lemons and fresh linen, the opposite of my childhood. But the static stayed in my vision. Sometimes, when it was quiet, I'd hear a tap, tap, tap in my own skull. When the lawyer called to say the house was being condemned by the city, I felt a sickening sense of completion. It was calling me back to witness its autopsy. I arrived on a Tuesday. The house looked smaller, shriveled like a dead fruit. The air around it felt heavy, a localized storm of misery. The inspector was a young man named Marcus. He wore a heavy-duty hazmat suit and carried a high-powered UV light. He looked at me with pity. "You grew up here, alone?" "With my parents," I said, my voice sounding like rust. "Right," he muttered, stepping onto the porch. The wood groaned, a sound of recognition. We entered. The smell hit me like a wall of rotting meat and wet earth. The static in my eyes began to swirl violently. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, shining his light on the walls. Under the UV light, the house transformed. The walls weren't just stained, they were covered in a pulsating bioluminescent network of veins. It looked like a nervous system. "I've never seen anything like this," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "It's a fungal colony, but it's integrated. Look at the floorboards." He pointed the light down. The veins ran deep into the wood, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like human faces. "We found the source in the basement," Marcus continued. "The surveyors thought it was a leak, but it's a mutation, Ophiocordyceps sinensis variant, but crossed with something heavy in the soil. It doesn't just eat the structure, it mimics it." We reached the pantry. The door was fused shut by a thick black crust. Marcus pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, there were no shelves, only a vertical shaft that dropped into the foundations. And there, suspended in a web of yellow fibrous filaments, were the parents. They weren't bodies anymore. They were biological armatures. My father's rib cage had been expanded to support the floor joists. My mother's long, elegant neck had been stretched 6 feet high, her vertebrae replaced by fungal stalks to hold up the ceiling of the hallway. Her face, the one I remembered, was a mask of hardened spores. "The whistling," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "The eyes in the closet." "It's a neuroparasite, Elias," Marcus said, backing away in horror. "It releases spores that trigger specific hallucinations. It makes you see ghosts so you stay away from the walls. It wants you isolated. It wants you paralyzed with fear because fear keeps the heart rate high and the spores feed on the carbon dioxide in your breath." I looked at the whistler in the vent. It wasn't a monster. It was a cluster of fruiting bodies waving in the draft. But then, the realization hit me, a cold, sharp needle in my brain. "Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow house. "You said it mimics the structure? It replaces the cells with its own?" "Yes," he said, checking his oxygen tank. "Why?" I looked at my hands. Under the dim, flickering light, I saw the static beneath my skin. My fingers were slightly too long. My neck felt heavy. "I grew up here," I repeated. "I ate the food grown in this soil. I breathed this air for 20 years. My parents didn't just become part of the house, did they?" Marcus looked at me, then at his UV light. He slowly turned the being toward me. I didn't have a shadow. The light passed through my chest as if I were made of translucent parchment. My heart wasn't a muscle. It was a dense black knot of mycelium. "Elias," Marcus whispered, dropping his light. The house exhaled. The walls began to ripple. The tap, tap, tap started again, but this time it was coming from inside my chest. "I'm not home, Marcus," I said as my jaw began to unhinge, stretching into the long, mouthless shape of the lady I had feared as a child. "I am the home." The front door slammed shut. The static took over, and for the first time in my life, the damp, mildewed darkness felt comforting.